Hi again, Nate Webb from the Webb Law Firm, webbattorney.com. I'm just here to talk to you about field sobriety tests and should you take those tests. So, in many cases, in most cases, it is advisable not to take the tests just because they're really not meant to show passing grades, so to speak. So you're never counted for something that is good. You're always marked against. And so it's like an exam where you start from 100% and marked down, and very rarely are you ever going to get 100%. So the only instance in which I would ever suggest that you might want to take one of these tests, which is very limited, is that if you've not had anything to drink or smoke or not had any substances, and you're pulled over and some officer says, I smell alcohol or something of that nature, and you know without a doubt that you don't have anything in your system, you might just skip right to, hey, let's take the portable breath test, okay? And then do that, all right? And it should show 0. If it doesn't show 0, show something else, then we've got a question. But only in that instance. Otherwise, I would not advise that you take these tests because they're difficult to do. First of all, they're done on the side of the road. With cars coming by at all kinds of speeds. And you can watch many videos on officer safety, and many times they're pulling someone over and investigating, and someone comes along and hits the car. So it's a very dangerous situation, both for you and the officer to do these on the side of the road. But unfortunately, that's where most of the time they're performed. And so I wouldn't suggest doing these. But if you did do these tests, what the officers are looking for are specific clues. And so the very first test that you might be asked to take, or you would be asked to take, would be what is called the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. And this is a test of your eyes using a stimulus. Usually they'll use a pen, or they'll use their finger, the officer who's administering this test, and they'll hold this they're supposed to hold it 12 to 15 inches from your nose at eye level. Okay, now, if you're 6'7" and the officer's 5'3", they might have you sit on the bumper of their car. And so they will administer this test, as best they can, doing that, using that stimulus. But they're supposed to check your eyes. So they're looking for 6 clues, and they're supposed to check each eye twice. It's really hardly ever done. Okay, so I rarely ever found a case where an officer administered this test appropriately according to their training. And so they're checking, first of all, to see if you have equal tracking of your eyes. If you don't have something wrong, neurologically or what have you, with your eyes. So they're first to eliminate that. Okay, there's equal tracking. We can move on. After they check, make sure you have equal pupils as well. So once those two things are established, then they can go ahead and begin to administer this test. And what they're looking for is officers will have been trained to testify, and when they testify, they'll say, it looks like a marble moving across sandpaper, okay? And so that means it's going to be twitching, right? It's going to be moving. So they're looking for that nystagmus, which is an involuntary jerking of your eyes, and that's associated with alcohol, okay? So if you have THC in your system and an officer does an HGN, horizontal gaze nystagmus, and they say they see this, then they're ill-informed, because it would not be present with THC in your system, only with alcohol. Now, there may be cases where there might be the two combined. Someone might have smoked and had alcohol, and so there might be some nystagmus. But if it's solely a THC situation, there would be no nystagmus, okay? No HGN, okay? So the first thing that the officer is looking for is whether or not your eyes have a lack of smooth pursuit. So they're taking that stimulus, as I mentioned, and they're moving it across a horizontal plane. This is a horizontal test, okay? There is also a vertical one. The horizontal plane, and they're looking for that involuntary twitching of your eyes. So they're supposed to go out here as far as they can, come back across, and it's not supposed to be done very quickly like this. I've seen this done a lot, but it's supposed to be done maybe 2 seconds out to each side and back and forth, and then you do that twice. So that's one of the clues for each eye, okay? And so lack of smooth pursuit. Is there a lack of smooth pursuit? They're not supposed to do any tests before that. They're not supposed to check for anything else before that. Then they check for what is called distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation. It's just fancy words for saying basically when I take it from your nose out here all the way to as far as your eye can look, and they hold it for a minimum of 3 seconds, or 3 or 4 seconds, that they see your eye twitching, okay? But if they hold it longer than that, then they can cause what's called fatigue nystagmus, which means that your eye's having to be strained for that period of time, and it eventually will twitch. So they're to do that twice, okay? So for this eye, and then this eye, and this eye again, and so forth. Do that twice, and looking for distinct and sustained nystagmus in both eyes, okay? And you're not supposed to be also distracted by strobe lights or anything like that. So the best practice for an officer would be to face you away from any overhead flashing lights, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, or to turn them off. Okay, and they might just have their backlights directing traffic to go around. So that's the second one. Again, they're looking for it twice in each eye. Okay. And the last is whether or not there's an angle of onset, is there nystagmus appearing before 45 degrees. And so they're taking that stimulus out from here to about what they estimate to be 45 degrees. Am I seeing it starting to twitch as I'm taking out to 45 degrees? Twice again, not just once, but twice in each eye. So those are 3 for each eye, so it's a total of 6 clues. And in Washington State, if in fact they attest that they do see those clues, when they're testifying at any type of hearing, that limits them to saying that the person has been consuming alcohol. They cannot say that it's an impairing test. In many other jurisdictions in the nation, sometimes they're able to do that. But there's a number of cases in Washington State in which the Fry test hasn't been met, which is basically a scientific standard test, and it states that it's not utilized here in Washington State for the purpose of establishing whether or not someone's impaired. Like I've had troopers testify in the past, I saw 6 clues and that meant they were over 0.08. That's improper testimony. That would be excluded, probably result in a mistrial. But anyway, so it's limited to just them being able to testify that someone's been consuming alcohol. So if they do that test, they're likely going to move on to now a little bit more difficult test, because that just requires you to stand in one spot, okay, or sit down. The next test they would do, again, in the standardized field sobriety test realm, would be the walk and turn test. And so they're going to have you stand with your feet not together, but one foot in front of the other, and they'll tell you which one. And so usually your left foot and then your right foot in front, and then they're going to have you stand in that position with your hands at your side. Then they're going to go ahead and tell you how to do the test. So you're supposed to stand in this awkward position, balancing, so to speak, while they then demonstrate the test to you. And so the officer or trooper will then demonstrate the test, and they're looking for a total of 8 clues in this test. And they'll demonstrate the test, and they're going to walk heel to toe. Now, keep in mind, when they say heel to toe, they don't say touch heel to toe. That would be the best practice, because one of the clues they're looking for is whether or not you touched heel to toe. But a lot of times you're not told that that's what they're looking for. And so anyway, the officer will demonstrate 3 steps, and then what they'll do is say, okay, you're going to end here. You're going to pretend it's number 9. Then you're going to take a turn by making a small series of steps, okay, around the other, okay? And so they'll demonstrate what that turn looks like. So it's not an about face like you might see on TV, or people might presume it's a military turn or something like that. It is a small series of steps. And then they'll walk back the next 3 steps, and then they'll say, do just like I did, but you're going to do 9 steps each way, so a total of 18 steps. And so they're looking for these 8 clues. And again, you're not really shown what each of those clues are. You're not told what they're looking for, so you wouldn't know what to focus on. And so, again, this is why I don't recommend that you perform these tests, because you really don't know what to focus on. They'll show you how to do it in a small manner, but they won't show you the entire test, and they'll say, and make sure you're focusing on this, and make sure you're focusing on that. They won't do that, and so they're not advisable to take. The last test they'll have you do is a balance test, and it's called one leg stand. And it is what it sounds like. You're standing on one leg. And so they'll say, put your hands at your sides, look straight ahead, put one foot out, whichever foot you like, and hold it up maybe 6 inches off the ground, the height of maybe a soda pop can. And so they'll have you hold that, and they're going to have you count out loud to 30 seconds. And so they're looking to see if you hop, if you use your arms for balance, if you put your foot down, if you sway, believe it or not. And so they're looking for those clues. And so I'll put up here's the Washington State Patrol clues list is what they're looking for. And you can find this online. You just look up Washington State DUI packet, and you'll see the whole thing that they use. So you can see each of the clues that they're looking for. So anyway, all they need is just a few clues. So like on the one leg stand, they're just looking for 1 clue. On the walk and turn, they're looking for 2 clues. On the HGN, they're just looking for a couple. And so if they see those, they're going to make an arrest. I think they're going to make an arrest if they've already asked you to take field sobriety tests. So it's in your best interest not to take them, because they probably already made up their mind at that point anyway. But that's what they're looking for with field sobriety test. Don't feel bad if you're watching this video and you're going, oh man, I wish I would have had this advice prior to doing this. I wish I hadn't taken them. It's okay. I know how to break them down. I know how to go over them. A lot of times these officers are in a hurry. They're only human, and they may not administer them correctly, or the circumstances in which they were administered. Juries can see that that's a difficult situation. I've had a jury trial one time where my client was saying, hey, I don't understand what you're saying, officer, as cars are whizzing by. And then afterwards the jury said, I don't know how anybody could possibly do those tests in that situation. So anyway, it's not advisable to take them, but if you do, don't worry, don't fret. We can talk about it, and usually there's video of it, and we can take a look and see what we can break down out of it. If you have questions about being arrested for DUI, if you have friends or family that have been arrested for DUI, please give us a call, and I'm happy to go over everything with you. All right, take care.